There's 144 people right now engaged in this conversation, and I'm sure we all feel the weight of it. While you were speaking, I already went to your website. I already sent you an email asking you if you're available to do some sort of an interview to give this presentation in my local area, because I think we can all agree that forget the media. The media is not going to help us. Governments are not going to help us. We're on our own. And unless we get this information onto the local level, people are they're too busy. They're not going to read books. They're just trying to make ends meet. But we all have libraries, and we all have high schools, and we all have venues that we can use to invite every single speaker that we've heard to give these presentations to our localities. And I think that's at least one tool that we all have that we can use. And I look forward to hearing from you after you read my email. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Laura. And you're describing precisely the process by which we're going to fix this problem. It is by thinking globally and acting locally. And I give talks all the time to small local groups. I gave one the other week to a bunch of urban gardeners and farmers in New York. Here I am in Canberra, Australia. And this is the wonder of the internet.
Yes.
This is the most important, this internet thing is the most important development in human evolution ever. It's because it enables us to join minds, share ideas, exchange experience and wisdom across an entire planet. For the first time in history, we would have had to have a very labored correspondence involving letters and sailing ships, 100 years ago or 150 years ago. So ideas traveled very slowly. Now they can travel at the speed of light, and they can be validated. They can be checked out by science. So we know the difference between a good idea, a truthful idea, a tested idea, and one that is frankly bullshit. So, we know we know a lot better what's real and what isn't. So, yes, by acting locally, by having kitchen table conversations, by forming small groups of urban guerrilla gardeners and setting up fresh, clean food supplies on your street, all of these types of activities, by forming mothers groups. How do we cleanse our house of toxins so that our babies may be raised in a healthy environment? All of these things are starting to happen. And the wonder of it is, as I say, it's not just Americans talking to Americans. It's Aussies, Americans, Japanese, Britons, Swiss, South Africans, Koreans. We're all having this conversation together, and that's a very exciting moment. And I want to just ask you to imagine when a baby is in the second trimester of a pregnancy, a wonderful thing happens. The neurons and the glia and the axons in the infant brain join up, and a blob of cells suddenly becomes a being capable of rational thought, sentience, imagination, feeling, and dreams. And at that moment, it becomes a human being. Now, this is starting to happen. This is starting to happen on a worldwide scale. We are joining up thoughts and ideas like the neurons in the infant brain. We are hooking up in real time, and ideas are being transmitted around the planet among millions and millions of us. And eventually, we're all going to be online by the end of this decade. Everybody on Earth is going to be online. So the capacity to have a human-wide conversation about these things and to take your brilliant local idea globally within 24 hours is going to be with us. Now, the downside to that is there's an awful lot of rubbish and bullshit and misinformation that's being traded on the internet as well. We have to be wise consumers. We have to understand the difference between truth and fiction. We have to know the difference between science and belief. And, once we've trained ourselves to do that, and that's no harder than training yourself to go into a fruit market and choose good fruit as opposed to rotten fruit. You've got to be able to choose, good fruit from rotten fruit when you walk in the market. Same on the internet and social media. Choose the good stuff, share the good stuff.
Thank you, Laura, for that comment. Next, we have Benny again. Benny, what's your question? Thank you again. What about, what is the potential for recycling garbage or agricultural waste? We see trees cut down, all that wood is just put into landfills or whatever. What is the potential to recycle and recover waste, especially agricultural waste, for anything better than just polluting?
It's absolutely huge, Benny. It is huge. Now, I want to put this really in perspective. My background, I'm not a scientist. I'm a scholar of classical literature, believe it or not. And I studied Homer when I was at university. And in the Odyssey, which was written 3,000 years ago, it describes the moment when Odysseus comes home and he sees his old dog. He's been gone for 20 years at the Trojan War and lost in the Mediterranean. And he sees his old dog. The dog's been waiting and it's been thrown out and it's been sitting on the dung heap outside the door of the house. And the dung heap was the thing that it says in the Odyssey that the men forked back onto the paddock every year after winter, right? So in the old days, and this goes right up until the 19th century, people took all their agricultural wastes and their kitchen wastes and they put it back on the fields, right? And, you know, the Chinese collected the night soil and they put it on the rice fields. So we recycled our nutrients. And then a couple of gentlemen called Haber and Bosch came along, German chemists, and invented, you know, nitrogen fertilizer, and people discovered urea and so forth. And suddenly we began a system of agriculture that is based entirely on waste, right? It's based on mining the resource, spreading it on the paddock, and then wasting 90% of it before it gets to the human being. Okay, so agriculture is a system of total waste. Modern agriculture. Traditional agriculture, much less so, because it recycles its nutrients. Now, if humanity wants to feed itself in the long run, it has to recycle nutrients. The easiest way to do that is via the cities, because cities are enormous catchments for nutrients, right? So a city like New York, a city like London, a city like Sydney, you know, it catches food from all over the world and transforms it into poo or waste. And it either goes down the sewer pipe into the ocean somewhere, or it goes into the landfill. So all those precious nutrients, the very things that keep us alive, are wasted. If we catch them, and we can catch them, you know, we can catch them at innumerable points, and there are lots of cities, including my own in Canberra, where we recycle all our kitchen and garden waste now. So all the clippings that I take off my veggies and things like that, they go into the green bin, and that gets turned into compost, and that compost gets reused on urban farms and gardens, food gardens. So urban food production, as opposed to broadacre agricultural food production, can actually recycle all the nutrients that we currently waste. And it can recycle water, guess what? And it doesn't take a lot of land. You can produce 10 times the volume of food from an area, from a hydroponic farm, or aquaponic farm, or some other concentrated, or even an Impossible Burger farm or something like that. You can produce a very high volume of food in a small area in a city on top of a building. And guess what? That food is climate proof, right? So no amount of hailstorms or droughts or floods is going to damage that food production system. So these big sky farms that people are now talking about, that Jeff Bezos has been talking about, and others, that is a major answer to the world food problem. You put one of those into Nairobi or Niger or any of the African countries, you've solved the local food problem. They're putting them into Dubai, for example. Now, Dubai is a desert country, right? It doesn't do farming. There's now a 50-story sky farm going in Dubai, and it's going to turn out 250,000 airline meals for Emirates Airlines every single day. So, you know, places that never used to be farming country are going to learn to produce food, may not by farming techniques, but you know, this is one of the most exciting developments that's going on. And this food can be produced without chemicals, and just simply, as I say, without fertilizer, because you're recycling the nutrients again and again and again, reusing them, because nutrients aren't destroyed. they're simply lost, and our present system wastes colossally. And another dimension of this is that we are polluting the earth with nitrogen fertilizer. If you look at the boundaries of the earth chart that Johan Rockstrom and his crew have developed, the boundary that has been far exceeded beyond the climate boundary, beyond the extinction boundary and things like that, the one that is worst of all is the pollution of the planet with nitrogen, because that causes those dead spots in the ocean that I mentioned, the pollution of rivers. It's toxic for people when it gets into their groundwater and they drink it. It causes all sorts of diseases, blue babies and what have you. So we are polluting the earth with a concentration of nitrogen that was not there in the natural system.
Would you agree with me that this whole business, and Elon Musk is in the news, he's a great guy, but going to Mars is kind of silly business? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, he's a rich man. Rich men have hobbies, they have racehorses, spaceships, you can't really stop them having mad ideas. I mean, to be honest with you, I prefer Gates's style because Gates at least cares about what's happening to the kids in Africa. And I care about what's happening to the kids in Africa, because what's happening to the kids in Africa is going to happen to the kids in Europe and America in the latter part of this century. Take it from me. We're all going to be facing famine if we don't fix the world food problem. So fixing the world food problem is important. Where I don't agree with Mr. Gates is that the American system of chemicals and fertilizers and high tech and cloning things and genetic engineering is the way to go. There are other much cleaner, safer, more sustainable ways to produce food. So Mr. Musk is entertaining himself. He's a man with a sense of humor. Look, he's never going to be able to settle Mars in any worthwhile sense that more than a handful of people could live on it. They're probably going to get blown out by the cosmic radiation, if they try and stay there very long, unless they spend their entire lives underground. And if they spend their entire lives underground on Mars, what's the difference between that and living in a nuclear bunker on Earth, on a devastated Earth? No, we need to address all 10 of the threats that I've written about in all of my books, all 10 of them, okay? One of them is nuclear war. And, we're in a very alarming situation with the risk of nuclear war breaking out over the Ukraine at the moment. We do not want to go there. We need to ban all nuclear weapons. We need to end the production of fossil fuels, climate change. We need to end this poisoning of the planet. So there's a lot of things that we need to do on our agenda. Otherwise, we're not going to save human civilization.
Thank you, Benny, for that. Julian, you've been giving us a lot of great solutions to all these effects. Is that also what's written in your chapter, Preventing Catastrophe? What's outlined in that chapter?
Well, basically, we've got to put the brakes on. We've got to put the brakes on this chemical outpouring because it's a much bigger problem than we ever thought it was. And it's slipped in under the radar. It's relied upon the claim that chemical X, if you ingest it in very, very small amounts, does not appear to have any toxic effects. And that is a bullshit argument, okay? It's a dishonest argument. It's an alchemist's argument. That argument was put forward in the 15th century, right, by an alchemist. And it's still being used by the chemical industry today to defend itself. So, once you release a chemical, it intermingles with other chemicals. It interacts with those other chemicals. It releases daughter chemicals, some of which may be more toxic than the original chemical. So we just don't know. But at the moment, we're releasing millions of these things willy-nilly in billions of tons. So, we're creating this chemical soup on our planet. No species has ever done that. Life on Earth nearly came to a halt 2 billion years ago when the blue-green algae, which were the only form of life on Earth in those days, basically produced so much of this very poisonous substance called oxygen that they almost killed themselves. So the entire world was inhabited in those days only by creatures that live in your compost heap, basically, or in your pond, the bottom of your pond, anoxic bacteria. And they excrete oxygen. So the oxygen levels in the atmosphere build up and up and up. And you've got a thing called the oxygen holocaust, in which all these species of microbes started dying out. But then some of them evolved to cope with the higher level of oxygen. This took hundreds of millions of years, but they did. And from that moment onwards, once that got in the ocean, all the other evolution that has occurred on Earth started. It started up 800 million years ago, when single-celled organisms became multi-celled organisms, became things that swam and crawled and flew. Basically, that's where everything came from, oxygen in the oceans. But we're in the process of turning the clock back to the anoxic ocean, to what they call a Canfield Ocean. And that's a very frightening possibility. Now, our oceans are already being stripped of their oxygen. There are signs the currents are starting to break down, so you're not going to get the mixing between the oxygen-rich surface layers and the deep layers. So we could be heading for another Permian-style extinction, which was the worst extinction event in Earth history, if we're not very careful. And it starts with this overflow of nutrients, basically, which triggers the process. So, you know, we're in a very delicate state here. And humans are responsible because our numbers are far too great. I mean, candidly, according to the scientific estimates, many of them that I've read, we've currently got a population about 4 times larger than the Earth can carry at the levels of consumption that we have in our society, right? So a sustainable Earth population would be around about 2 billion people. So think about that at the moment. Think about cattle in a paddock, in a field. Think about putting 800 cattle in a field that will only carry 200. And think about what happens. You know, every farmer will tell you what happens if you put 800 cattle where you can only feed 200. That's what we've done to the planet. And we're going to reap the consequences unless we start putting the brakes on things, you know, fairly quickly.